Hey guys, it's Paradise, and Grey Zone Warfare, the newest tactical FPS extraction style shooter, has kind of blown up recently, and it's one we've been very interested in. But how does it compare as a newly released early access game going up against already established titles across this mixture of genres? As massive fans of FPS games like Battlefield and Call of Duty, but also the more tactical games like Arma, CS and Valorant, we knew we had to try Grey Zone Warfare as soon as we could. Every time a studio attempts to iterate on an established format, especially in early access, there's always room for error or for something to really shine and stand out. So with over 60 hours of gameplay logged in, we feel we can talk about this game and if or if not it's on track to be something very special. As per usual with our reviews, this will be spoiler free, and luckily with a title such as this, there isn't really any story or major elements of the game to be spoiled, as well it's a PvEvP game. This brings us to what exactly Grey Zone Warfare is and what you can expect from it. Think of this game as a tactical FPS extraction with both PvE and PvEvP modes. The game has a general focus on PvP, especially at the beginning, but it does branch out into more PvP as you progress and play more. This is a game where you have a persistent character, your loadout, and your storage, where you put all of your loot that you've gained by embarking on missions out in the large 42 square kilometer world. Thankfully, with a big world like this, it's not all just a walking simulator, as they have a very awesome helicopter system that allows you to both deploy and extract from the world in a physical helicopter that you actually jump in and fly away on. So every time you're leaving base or going back to base, you get to say, "Run! Go! Get to the chopper!" This, however, does come with its own issues that need ironing out, like enemy players camping the LZs, the landing zones, or just a very limited number of helicopters per faction on the map at any one time. And when it comes to factions, there's 3 to choose from, and these will determine where your base is on the map, who you can squad up with, and the friendly faction members on your team will be marked on the map, and they're meant to be friendly to you. Opposing faction members, however, will be hostile and they will not be marked on your map, so they are a constant threat as you are out there in the world. That is, unless you play the PvE mode, where the only threat is going to be the AI. Because of the layout of the 3 factions in this triangle formation on the map, there's various points of interest and settlements to explore and loot, which are kind of mirrored on the map per faction, creating a sort of structure to the threat level increasing as you get closer and closer to other factions' bases and their surrounding locations. Honestly, this unique format of a larger map where each faction is persistent and you never really quite know who you're going to run into out in the field really adds to the excitement and overall fun. Currently, the main form of progressing in the game is to do tasks or quests from the vendors. These will require you to complete various objectives to gain reputation, money and loot, to level up these vendors and have access to even more powerful gear and weapons. These tasks will start off by having you fetch certain intel out in the town near your base, kill a specific boss or number of enemies, recover certain things or mark caches. As you progress further and further in this task system though, and there are around 150 in total currently, you will then be asked to travel further away from your base to locations that are nearer the enemy faction's territory, and as such, you'll be more likely to encounter enemy faction members who might be looting themselves, doing their own tasks, or looking for PvP. And this is where the game really starts to get interesting and where the intensity that you would expect from an extraction game starts to kick in. So let's talk about the AI NPCs and the PvP against other players. You see, the AI is a threat, and as an early access game, you can expect some systems aren't perfect or fully polished. Sometimes you will get instant killed by an AI who's over 100 meters away down a road with an iron-sighted AK, or you could mag dump an AI and they simply survive like it was nothing. These things will happen from time to time and they can be frustrating. However, we expect this to improve as time goes on and the servers, AI programming and hit detection improves. While these things happen, they aren't super common, and outside of those situations, it is very fun and rewarding to understand how to tackle the various situations, with AI roaming around a location you need to get into, or later on in the high tier areas, massive groups of more deadly AI guarding the high tier loot. The AI are always a threat of sorts due to their inconsistency, but they need to be somewhat threatening to keep the looting and exploring interesting. Luckily though, players of all factions will eventually need to go to the same quest locations and objectives in order to progress, leading to two awesome situations. Either teaming up with randoms in your faction as you have the same or similar tasks to do, and getting yourself into intense PvP firefights against enemy faction members and squads vying to get to the same location's loot. So far, the PvP and the interaction with other players in your faction has been one of the real highlights of the game for us. While intense PvP fights isn't uncommon in a high-stakes extraction PvP game like this, our experience with friendly faction members has really stood out as being quite interesting, and while this might be in a vacuum, we've had only positive and fun interactions with friendly faction members. That isn't to say that some people aren't out there team killing on purpose and that sucks, but for us, we've encountered a very positive and fun community. When you combine this with the PvP in some of the map's really interesting locations, like forests, towns, and fields, it is absolutely awesome to try out the different array of weapons, scopes, and attachments in these battles. And speaking of weapons and attachments, let's go over the loot and gear, because at the end of the day, it's all about getting stuff, extracting it, and storing it or using it. There's no doubt that the current weapon selection is adequate for a time, especially as an early access title, but overall it is quite small. There isn't a massive array of different weapon platforms to utilize, and for the majority of your gameplay you'll likely be using an M4 or an AK, or one of the two snipers if that's your thing. Later on this does change a little with different variants and attachments, but the majority of your playtime will be using the same weapons, which definitely needs to improve, and to my understanding this is already planned. Luckily, however, the attachment system is both impressive and fun. There's a ton of different attachments, from grips to stocks, handguards, sight suppressors, flash hiders, gas blocks, charging handles, and more. This is where the small range of weapons starts to feel larger, as you can completely change and customize your gun, affecting its performance but also its appearance. Overall, the attachments are an excellent addition to the game, and we can't wait for this to be expanded on even more. But then you have your gear, like your helmets, plate vests, belts, headphones, safe box, and backpack. There currently isn't a massive range of these items as well, and you will often see people in the same gear, and you'll probably be running similar gear yourself. It's always fun to take out an enemy and find a much better and bigger backpack or an improved plate vest in these type of games, and while that is present, it doesn't happen too much due to the smaller loot pool of these items. Much like weapons and attachments, leveling up the vendors does give you access to additional things in these categories, but again, it would be nice if this was expanded. Finally, you have loot, the things that you actually find in buildings and out in the world while exploring. This is probably the only aspect of the game where I feel it is truly lacking. The only things you really find while exploring is weapons, the occasional backpack or plate vest or attachment, and then food or drink. You do have to manage a constantly draining food and drink meter. This is one of the game's survival mechanics, so it's important to find these out while looting. However, the addition of more exciting items to find while scavenging that sell for a lot of money is missing. One of the most exciting things to find while looting in a game like Tarkov is to come across a GPU or a similar item that's somewhat rare and sells for a lot of money. The game is currently missing that dopamine hit of exploring and looting something that's actually worthwhile and exciting. Finding your 10th Mosin Nagant or AK on the floor while you're out there in the world just doesn't have the same effect. So the addition of an extra loot table with additional things to find would be a really nice improvement and add to the overall lure of spending hours and hours out in the world looking for these things. This could also extend to the previous categories of loot, like finding special scopes, weapons only available by looting, as well as extra big backpacks or plate carriers guarded by strong AI. This would just overall make the game better in my opinion. But what about the game's survival mechanics? Well, it has a very cool health system which works in combination with the game's ballistic simulation. In the game, there are different ammo types that incorporate authentic ballistics, so things like hollow or soft point rounds will be quite strong against flesh, but quite weak against plate vests. Meanwhile, armor-piercing rounds will be able to penetrate those plate vests with ease, but leave smaller wounds overall. This then plays into the game's health system, whereby your flesh, bones, and organs can all be damaged on your hitbox depending on where you're hit, and these things require different types of meds, from bandages to painkillers, splints, circuits, blood bags, and more. This really adds to the overall technical nature of the game, where every hit counts and your movement matters, because one mistake could cost you or your enemy their entire loadout, because when you die, of course, you drop everything outside of your safe box. As said before, there is a food and drink meter, but there's also intoxication for when you start to use higher tier meds, and even radiation, which I believe will be very important when it comes to going to ground zero in the middle of the map for future specific events. Since this is an early access game and things are likely to be improved on, here's a list of improvements that we would like to see implemented to make the game even better. It would be awesome to have roaming bosses with unique loot and bodyguards, which would incentivize farming specific locations to find and kill them to gain special or otherwise unique items not available via vendors. The current bosses are a little underwhelming at the moment, so we would like to see these really brought up. More weapon variety and viability, shout out to pistols and shotguns being particularly bad at the moment, would be very nice to see. Certain weapon types could 100% do with a buff so that they can actually be used. The helicopter system is really cool, and we think it needs a little revamp to reach its full potential. It would be great if there was some kind of rediversion to the flight path or a warning system if enemy players are camping an LZ. Maybe smokes could pop as you land to stop camping snipers from hitting you, giving you chance to get to the tree line and disperse, allowing for an actual firefight and not just an instant death. The audio seems to be oddly overtuned at the moment, as you can hear shots from extremely far away and they sound close. Helicopters are also very loud when riding, so some tweaking there would be nice. As mentioned, additional non-combat valuables to loot and sell or collect would make exploring extra exciting and incentivize playing more. Perhaps there is some way to incorporate non-combat valuables into some kind of collection system or cosmetic system that really makes it more exciting to loot. When setting a waypoint on your map, it would be really cool if it applied it for your entire squad, making it easier to navigate as a team. On this point, doing tasks when in a squad should really be shared between all of you. And finally, some AI tuning would be great, as the aggro radius seems very large at the moment, where you often pull extra groups of enemies adjacent to you in buildings or camps once you start fighting. When you're in a dense area, this simply means you get swarmed by AI. And their effective range also seems a little overtuned at the moment, especially if they're just using an iron-sighted weapon or a red dot. They can easily snipe you from over 100 meters away instantly. We think it would be awesome if all of these changes managed to make their way in the game, and overall it would be a more fun and pleasant experience to farm, play, and sink those hours in. Now let's talk about the performance and graphics. It isn't exactly unusual for an early access game to have somewhat poor performance, and Greyzone Warfare isn't an exception to this. If you have a low or even low to mid-end PC, you can expect to have some issues. It's a large map with up to 48 players, a ton of AI scattered around at various settlements, so you will have dips to your FPS here and there. For some people it might be unplayable, but if you have a high-end PC like a 30 or 40 plus series graphics card, you should be okay. With some specific tweaks, like enabling FSR for 30 series cards or DLSS for 40 series cards, you should see dramatic performance improvements. Personally, my performance hasn't been too bad. I locked FPS to 60 to reduce the variability, and it doesn't dip much lower than that outside of entering new cities for the first time. Server issues can happen though, and rubber banding has been an issue as of late, and hopefully this can be resolved, as banding while shooting AI or players is extremely impactful to enjoyment. So the performance isn't the best, but honestly I've experienced much worse, and for me I will say it's playable and enjoyable with some hiccups. Graphically, the game is nothing short of impressive, the world looks great even on low settings, and the map from its jungles to towns is overall quite vibrant and immersive. I really do like the visuals in this game. So overall, Greyzone Warfare is an incredible entry into the early access tactical FPS extraction space. It does things its own way, adds a new spice to an unexplored and otherwise static genre. I like the faction system, I like the world they've created, and the awesome customization of the weapons. It looks great, and the gameplay is very fun once you get into PvP and encounter those opposing faction members. That being said, more loot and weapon variety would help add to its longevity and increase the overall gameplay loop, and there are some nitpicks that would make a big difference to enjoyment once ironed out, and I think these things are planned. Shout out to the LZ campers and faction team killers out there, these things probably need to be looked at and reworked. I can see Greyzone Warfare being a staple and a home for many FPS players looking for a fresh and exciting extraction game if they keep adding, improving, and iterating on it as time goes on. Remember, this is an early access title, so we're not going to be giving it a score just yet, but there is room for both failure and improvement. They have a very good baseline of a game here, so if they can do it justice and keep on track with regular updates and additions, this could be something really, really awesome. If you enjoyed this video, you can show support by dropping a like down below and subscribing, because we release daily gaming videos, news, and guides.